Oh, now it's going. Good morning, everybody. Apologies for the slight delay to starting there. Facebook's on your Zoom. And it did me, but we're here now. So thank you very much for joining us this morning. Today we've got Michelle Worgan with us. She's a hub favourite. She's been with us pretty much since the very beginning of the hub. She's already spoken in the hub before, and we're so excited to have her back now, continuing this developing conversation around inclusivity and becoming an inclusive teacher. I know that some of you have had the opportunity to fill in Michelle's questionnaire, a little quick survey, which was quite fun. If you haven't had a chance, I'll post a link to it in the comments now so you can give it a go. Okay, so I'll hand over to Michelle.
Thank you, T. I can't see who's watching live at the moment. So I know that quite a few people in the group know me already, but I know there are also a few new members. So I'll just introduce myself very quickly. So my name is Michelle Worgan, and I'm based in Spain, very close to where Teresa lives. And I've been a teacher for more than 20 years now, and in the last few years I've also been working as a materials writer specializing in primary, and that's what I do pretty much full time now. So I'm going to share my presentation with you now so that you can see that, and we'll get started. Is that, can everybody see that? Teresa, can you see that? Yeah, great. Okay, so today's session is all about becoming an inclusive teacher. And this is what we're going to be looking at. First of all, we'll look at how inclusive are you. If you did the quiz, as T just said, that's what I'm referring to. Then we're going to talk a little bit about the different ways in which children can be excluded. Then we'll look at what teachers can do about this. We'll look at some principles for inclusive young learner materials and lessons. We'll talk a bit about learner well-being. And finally, I'm going to tell you a bit about a course that I'm running soon. I know it seems like a lot, but hopefully we'll have time to get through it all. So the first thing we're going to do is talk about inclusion and exclusion, so what that means. So before we do that, I just wanted to ask if people have done the questionnaire, the quiz. So it's a quiz, really, not a questionnaire. If you haven't, don't worry. You don't really need to have done it. But the link is in the post from yesterday. I shared a post yesterday so that you can go and do it after the session if you want to. And it's just a bit of fun, really. It's not really serious, so don't take it to heart. But when I was setting this up, when I created this quiz, I had three kind of imaginary teacher profiles in mind. So these are not necessarily representative of any one person. So don't worry if you got a result that you weren't expecting. But the three profiles I called the fairness fledgling, the diversity discoverer, and the inclusion idol. And here are some of the conclusions that I drew from the answer options in each profile. So if you have done the quiz and you know which answer you got already, then you may be interested in this. So if, for example, you're a fairness fledgling, you maybe like to be in control of your class, you're confident about your teaching, and you get excellent results for most of your learners. You're really happy with the way things go in the classroom, but maybe you're not so sure on how you can help some of your learners. And you think that learner autonomy is impractical, partly because you like to be in control, and also maybe you have a very large class, or you teach very young learners and you just don't think it's practical. If you're a diversity discoverer, maybe you make your own materials and you design differentiated tasks to suit different learners. Maybe you've heard of learner-centered approaches like project-based learning, but you're not really sure how they work or how you could implement them. And perhaps you'd like to try using formative assessment rather than summative assessment like tests, because maybe you've read about this, but you're also maybe not sure about how to go about it. And then there's the inclusion idol. If you are the inclusion idol, you probably use a range of diverse materials in your lessons. Excuse me. You maybe also use a variety of approaches and different methods to your teaching. Perhaps you're interested in action research and trying different things out in your classroom and seeing what effect they have. You'd consider using a learner-centered approach, but perhaps you need a little bit more training, and you're striving for inclusion in your classroom. So these are kind of the three profiles. Now, of course, these may not be true for you, and you may feel that you're a mix of different profiles, and that's perfectly normal. And even if you are an inclusion idol, according to the quiz, that doesn't mean that all your work is done. There's always more we can learn and try out in our classrooms. So let's get to the actual important stuff. So we're going to think about inclusion and exclusion and what we as teachers can do to make sure our classrooms are inclusive. So to start with, we're going to look at this list of ways in which learners can be excluded at school. Of course, they can be also excluded in the same ways by society, but we're focusing on at school and in the classroom. Okay, so just having a look at these ways in which people can be excluded, I want you to think about the role a teacher plays in them. So, for example, how might a teacher exclude by gender in the classroom? Now, I can't see the chat right now, so I'm going to see if I can open it on my phone, or maybe see if you, if people comment, maybe you could read them out. I'm not sure. I'll give you a couple of minutes to think.
Absolutely. One of the questions that I liked it was yesterday was about games and having competition and dividing boys and girls. That kind of stuck out as one way that teachers might divide students.
Exactly. Yeah, that's what, that's one of the things that I talk about a little bit is yeah, a lot of the simple things that we do in the classroom. And I had this example myself, actually, that simple like team games where if the teams are divided by girls against boys, they may be excluding a non-binary student, for example. I can't find the, I can't see the streaming on Facebook. So, oh, here it is. So I'm going to see if I can see the comments. And see who's here. Simon's here. Hello, Simon. Just going back to the list, I'm not going to go through all of these, but obviously there's so many ways in which a teacher can exclude a student without even realizing it. So, for example, a physical game that you play in the classroom might exclude a student with a physical disability, or maybe a student with dyspraxia, which means that they might have coordination difficulties. That could be, any kind of physical game like a race or a ball game, those kind of things. A family tree activity might exclude some children if all the examples that you give have two heterosexual parents, for example. A pronunciation activity can also exclude It can exclude students with regional accents maybe, or with speech impairments and so on. So there's lots of things. So I'm not just thinking about, you know, a racist, bigoted teacher who may exclude students in their class, but just from the simple things that we do in the classroom that we've been doing maybe forever, sometimes it's worth thinking about whether a child might feel excluded. So what can we do about it? Well, we can consider using strategies, different inclusive strategies to help with any students that might have disabilities or learning difference. There's things we can do in the classroom to help them if you do have students with disabilities. Just being aware and sensitive towards gender and sexuality and things like that, and being mindful of the way you phrase things sometimes. It's also good to have social and emotional learning. That's what SEL refers to, social and emotional learning strategies and activities that you can do in the classroom to help with mental health, and just being aware that students may have mental health issues. We can also make sure we include different backgrounds and cultures that our students may have if you have a more of a multicultural class. And in general, just avoiding a white cis heteronormative default, which I think a lot of us have this because it's what is kind of what some of us are, or what the way we've been brought up. And I think we need to be aware of this bias that we might have and try to avoid this. Some more ideas on the next slide. Obviously, using our materials to represent different minorities. These could be, we're trying to do this as a course book writer. I've tried to do this in my course books and my materials. Sometimes I can get away with being more representative and sometimes not, depends on the publisher and the markets, etc. But you as a teacher can represent whoever you like in your materials. So that's something to think about. It's also important to, I think, include maybe characters or people with learning differences and mental health issues in our materials, in our lessons. That will help, I think, students just have that that bit more tolerance when things do happen, or if there are students in their class with learning differences, for example. Talking about it is important. We can also use task types that may benefit students with different learning differences, and also use approaches that are more suited to neurodivergent students, which is what I'm going to talk about next. Another thing we can do is to teach and to promote English as a lingua franca. I'm thinking more about the pronunciation aspect here. So it's important to avoid giving students that objective of sounding like a native speaker. So if we use our pronunciation activities and focus more on intelligibility and promote intelligibility rather than sounding like the teacher or sounding like this, that's going to help with that as well. And I put anything else in case anybody in there who's watching it live on Facebook wanted to add anything else that perhaps we could do. Feel free to type anything in the chat now or during the whole talk. So I just have a quick look. No, I can say a couple of comments.
Not anything about that, but talking about board games.
Yeah, I'm just seeing that now. So Stephanie says using a bigger ball for board games makes it a bit easier for children with dyspraxia, physical dyspraxia. Yeah, okay, yeah, that's a good. I actually have a bit. My toy box, which is behind me, is close, but I have this big ball which is much better. You see Can you see that? Because I know I'm very small because I'm showing my screen, but it's a big soft ball, and it's something like that might be more suitable. Okay, part 2 then. Just checking the time. In this part, I'm going to talk about inclusive activities and approaches, which for me play a big part in inclusion. And when I talk about inclusion, or the courses that I run and the sessions that I do, a lot of it is about approaches, teaching approaches, methodological approaches. And I've talked about this before in different sessions, about how sometimes I think that the traditional approaches that we use in ELT might not be the best ones for all our students. So, as you know, the typical approach is the communicative approach, and usually we teach language, vocabulary, grammar, etc. through PPP, which is presentation, practice, and production, right? And this is how most course books work. We present the new language first, then we give students opportunities to practice it, maybe by doing exercises in their books or by playing controlled games where they practice the structure or the vocabulary and so on. And then we ask them to use that new language in a less controlled activity. It could be orally or in writing, right? That's a kind of a general approach. And there's usually quite a big focus on reading and writing. And by reading and writing, I don't mean long texts, but we focus on the written forms of vocabulary and grammar quite a lot, even in primary and lower primary. I was working on an activity book not long ago for the first year of primary, which here in Spain are age 6 to 7. And there was a lot of tracing in the activity book. I mean, I had to include it, like the publisher told me, you know, we need to have all of these tracing activities in the book. And I thought, well, why are we focusing on the written forms? If you think about the activities in your activity books that you use with your students, just, you know, a lot of them are text-based. A lot of the activities are text-based. And as you go up the levels, upper primary, secondary, well, even more so. And text-based might just be filling in the gaps of a sentence, but it's still writing and it's still reading. And I'm not saying there's anything inherently wrong with this approach, because we've been using this for, most of us have been using this for about 50 years at least, I think. My knowledge of the history of ELT is slightly lacking now. But I do think that this way of teaching can be quite neurotypical, and that there are alternative approaches that we can consider which cater to the strengths of neurodivergent learners. Now, a few weeks ago, Anne-Margaret Smith did a talk here where she talked about neurodivergent learners and learners with specific learning difficulties and differences. And I recommend that if you want to know more. Anne-Margaret is the expert. But here are some examples of strengths that different neurodivergent learners may have. So I know it's difficult to cater for all the students in your class because their strengths will vary. But what we can do is provide activities that different learners will do well at. So just making sure that there's variety in the type of activity. So you can have your activity book exercises with your gap fills, etc. But also try to include some critical thinking or creative thinking activities. Or perhaps you could offer students a choice between activities. So you could ask the learners to choose between an imaginative activity, for example, and a problem-solving activity, or to do the activities in their book, or to offer them a different alternative if they want to, and they can choose. They choose the one that works for them. You can also change the nature of the activities in your materials, in your course books. You can substitute questions. You can, maybe if you've got a long reading text, you can turn it into shorter sections. You could do a jigsaw reading activity or a reading race. The important thing is to consider your students and who might enjoy an activity, who might benefit from an activity, and who might not. So a student with ADHD or attention deficit might find a reading race with very short text a lot of fun. But a student with dyspraxia would find it very challenging. So the short line is, I think, offer students a variety of ways of doing an activity where possible. And it's just worth bearing in mind the challenges and strengths of your students when you're planning an activity, planning a lesson, or planning a course. I feel like I've been just talking for ages, but as we don't have people in the Zoom, it's quite hard to be interactive. So I said that we were going to talk about some general principles for inclusive young learner materials. And these are my principles, okay? These are ones that I came up with when I was designing a framework for myself. Because we've just been talking about what we can do at activity level, which is a great first step, because we can adapt things to our students' needs, but it's also possible to consider or reconsider our teaching approach as a whole. So I believe that young learner programs or courses should include these things. So real-world learning, for example, real-world learning basically just refers to giving students real reasons to use the language to communicate, talk about things that are happening in their lives or in the world, and taking the focus away from the language itself, maybe, putting the focus on the topic rather than we're going to learn these words or we're going to practice this structure. Let's focus on why they're learning those words or that structure. Exploration and discovery for me is really important with children, with young learners, especially in primary. We know that children learn by exploring the world around them. So we can include this in our lessons as well. If you're going to be looking at a specific topic, it could be the topic in your coursebook unit. Allow them to explore that topic by asking questions and then have them try and find the answer to those questions. I think just giving students the opportunity to explore and discover things for themselves, and then also giving them the language to do so, is much more engaging than just receiving, you know, like the vocabulary or the structure and say, practice this, I'm going to practice this. I think there's, you know, exploration, discovery is much more motivating. Learner agency is another big one for me, giving learners responsibility for their learning, even when they're very young. I'm not going to give you specific examples of these things right now because we don't have time and there's too much I want to talk about. But in the future, I am offering different sessions and courses and things that we might look at these in more detail. Flexibility and adaptability is really important, I think, on the teacher's side. So you need to be flexible and adaptable, and also your materials and your activities. So a bit like what we were discussing before about giving choice and offering different options to choose from, and also allowing students to maybe change their minds. I think that's something that we sometimes forget to do. Community and connection for me is like the most important thing. It really is. I think if you don't have a a classroom community, if students are not getting on well and there aren't good relationships, then it's probably not going to be a very inclusive classroom. Reflection is something also that I think is important, especially if you're taking a learner-centered approach. It's important to have this reflection stage for the students, but also for you. You need to also, I think, reflect on what's been happening, what progress students have been making, what problems have occurred, and then kind of take it from there. And then finally, the whole child. The whole child refers to really just remembering that the students in your classroom are people. They're not just students in your classroom. They have lives, they have feelings and beliefs and things that happen to them and needs. And it's just remembering all these things. So these principles, I think we need to keep in mind when we're developing materials and activities, whether it's, you know, just planning a lesson or designing a course. And I'm using these for my own materials that I'm going to be creating hopefully soon when I've got time to create them. So those principles are actually from a framework that I designed called the Inclusive Pedagogies Framework. And here you can see the center of the framework, which has got those general principles. You can actually get a free copy of this if you want one from my website. You just have to input your email and you'll be signed up to the mailing list. So that's freely available, but it's just the framework itself. It doesn't have any information. So I made this for myself and I thought I'm going to share it with people because they might find it useful. But then I realized that just sharing the framework itself wasn't really very useful. So I wrote a companion guide to the framework, which actually I have here because I got a copy printed out for myself. It's on PDF form on the website, and you can also get a copy of this, which is just $3.99 if you want one. So this framework, then we're now going to look at a part of this, which is the bottom part, which refers to learner well-being, because I think well-being is the absolute basics of a positive classroom environment and the first thing we need to consider if we want an inclusive classroom. So we're going to think a little bit about learner needs, because if a learner doesn't have their basic needs met, then learning isn't going to take place. And those needs include their well-being. So you might recognize this pyramid as Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And I know there are some issues with this now because it's very hierarchical, but I think it still provides a good visual to help us remember a learner's needs. So we're going to quickly just look at each level now, and feel free to answer in the Facebook chat. In a classroom, we're going to think about what we can do to meet the needs of a learner in each section. So the physiological needs, those basic needs, what do you think are the basic physiological needs of a learner? And thinking about it in the classroom as well. Well, I think, obviously, go on, T.
No, I was going to say kind of it's physiological, kind of just literally physical beings. So having a comfortable chair and their own space and things like that.
Yeah, you're like cutting out a bit for me, so I couldn't really hear apart from the comfortable chair. So I don't know if you said anything else. But yeah, things like that. Yeah, definitely, because comfort's really important. Obviously, it's the basics like food, water, having enough sleep, being able to go to the bathroom. The temperature of the classroom is important as well. I see that Stephanie's made a comment, sitting on a seat where the child's feet are not swinging. Okay, yeah, I mean, that's again, before we started broadcasting today, I was talking to T about ergonomics, because we work at desks, sitting at desks for many hours every day, and ergonomics are really important. Yeah, in the classroom where children, especially in, you know, their mainstream education, maybe not in their after school English lessons, but in their schools, they're sitting at a desk for many hours of the day, and we don't really think about whether the chairs are the right size or the right height. So it's just something to think about. So obviously, if the children in your class, any child in your class is hungry or thirsty or hot or cold or tired, or they need the bathroom, all these things are going to affect their capacity to learn. So this at the most basic level is really important. But then they need to feel safe, physically safe and emotionally safe. So do you have any ideas about what we can do to make sure that students are physically safe and emotionally safe?
Hopefully I won't break up for you. But I guess in terms of the relationships between the students in class, because I know there's a lot happening in the UK now where there's a lot more integration, and they tend to only exclude students if there is a safety issue.
If there's a what issue, sorry?
A safety
A
issue.
safety issue, okay. Right, okay. Yeah, I mean, the relationships are super important, and this kind of also goes with the next level of the pyramid, no, the love and belonging one. So yeah, it's all about that positive, welcoming classroom environment. That is for emotional safety, and it's those relationships with people that the student needs to know that the teacher cares about them, and they also need to have friendships in the classroom. I think that's really important. So sometimes we have students who don't seem to have any friends in the class, and this is really hard because it's going to be really hard for them to feel comfortable in that classroom and therefore to learn. Simon says promote respect, peace and love. Yeah, exactly. Going on to the next one is esteem. So students need to feel good about themselves, and they need to feel good about their learning. So are they aware of their progress? If not, we need to incorporate activities that help them become aware of their progress. Are there opportunities for praise? So praise from the teacher, but also maybe praising each other. These kind of things can help a lot. And then finally, the last one at the top, self-actualization. They need to feel that they can develop to their full potential. And this is, I think this is where the methodology comes in, because I think that a learner-centered approach that includes those general principles that we looked at before can help lead to this. So we're going to move on because I'm aware of time, and we're going to think a bit more about social emotional learning and the emotional aspect of that safety that we just looked at in the hierarchy of needs. So once we know what the needs are, it's important to make sure that both the teacher and the learners are aware of their emotional states and their physical states, and that they know how to express these. Because if a learner is able to inform the teacher of distress, or if the teacher is able to pick up on those signals, then steps can be taken to help the learner. So there are different ways in which we can make this happen. So with younger children, we might want to have a system that can help them communicate their needs or their feelings, because they might not be able to do it in words, even in their own language. Sometimes with children, they're not always aware of why they're doing something, what they're not aware of where their behavior comes from. So to get students into the habit of thinking about their feelings, this is part of social and emotional learning. So maybe a system could be something simple like post-it notes, colored post-it notes. We can give them color-coded post-it notes that they can place on their desk, and they can have different meanings. So maybe one color means that they're stuck on an activity, a different color means that they need to go to the bathroom, I don't know, whatever. But if you have a system like this, it's kind of like a non-invasive way of expressing something. They don't have to put up their hand, they don't have to say it out loud, they can just put the post-it on their desk. Or maybe using emojis, some kind of visual aid with emojis. You could get them to make their own little cards and draw emojis on them. And then again, they can just place them on the desk if they want to, or maybe go up to your desk and just place the emoji card on your desk. And it's just a way of them to be able to communicate their feelings without letting the whole class know, which might be a problem. With older learners, something more subtle may be required. So although I really like these types of activities, they are responsive, they are reactive rather than proactive, because they're dealing with something once it's happening. So how can we proactively make sure that learners feel comfortable in the classroom? Which I think is the first step, basically, for learning to take place. Well, for me, it's all about the relationships, and we touched on this before with the pyramid. We need to create this inclusive environment where everyone feels included and supported by everyone, not just the teacher. I think we need to make sure that learners feel included by their peers and also supported by them. And this may require some learner training. Doesn't always come naturally for young learners. But I do think that we can give them responsibility and agency over their behaviour, even very young learners. It just takes a little bit of time at the beginning of the year, especially if they're used to having, strict rules and a very teacher-centred approach. Now, I'm not saying get rid of all the rules. The rules are really important. I think a lot of people do some kind of class contract, or with one of my classes one year, we made a little book of all the rules that they came up with, and they each made a page, and then we had the book visible somewhere where students could refer to it whenever they felt that a rule was being broken. But yeah, so have your rules, but also allow students to participate in those rules and to know why they have those rules. At the beginning, we also mentioned about how girls against boys team activities can exclude, but competition-based activities in general can exclude some learners. So team building activities tend to be better. I'm not saying don't play any competitive games, because everybody loves a competitive game, but also include team building activities and games. There's also, you can have circle time discussions to talk about why learners need to listen to each other and support each other, for example. It might be uncomfortable for some learners to talk about themselves or their classmates or real issues they have, but you can easily set it up as some kind of role play and use kind of fictional based on reality situations, if that makes sense. So I did an activity like this once with a group. I think they were aged about 9 or 10, I think, maybe a bit younger. We were having some issues with relationships, and with maybe 1 or 2 learners being excluded by the others. And so I designed an activity which was basically taking some of the problems that we had in the class, writing them on, I think it was post-it notes or little pieces of paper, but as kind of fictional problems. And then the students had to read about these problems and think of ways to solve those problems, to imagine that a student had this problem in the class and what they could do to help. And that worked really well. I don't actually know if any of them felt identified. They didn't, so maybe it was too subtle actually, but there are different ways in which you can talk about the issues without making it obvious who you're talking about. So what time is it? 1:45. Okay, so the last thing I wanted to talk about is inclusive spaces, because I think the way you set up the classroom and the space, the learning space, can encourage a friendly, supportive atmosphere. So if you can move the tables and the chairs to create a circle or groups, depending on the activity, if it can be flexible, even better. You can have a chill out corner that learners can go to if they're feeling overwhelmed or upset. I know that you might not have a very big classroom, and you might not have space for a corner, but you'd be surprised at how much difference a couple of cushions on the floor can make. It's just, and also I think it just shows the students that the teachers open to doing different things, non-traditional, and being more concerned about the students themselves and their feelings. I think there's a reason why many classrooms still have their desks in rows, and I think it's just crowd control, basically. Everyone's looking to the front, everyone's looking at the teacher, but personally I don't think that's the best way to teach. So going back to the quiz from the beginning and the 3 profiles with the 3 different types of teacher with differing maybe levels of interest and confidence in inclusion and inclusive methods. Whether you're a fairness fledgling or a diversity discoverer or an inclusion idol, a bit of a mouthful of those things. I don't know why I gave them those names. I was trying to be clever. But whichever one you are, I think there's something that I can help you with if you are looking for help. Because I think there's always things we can work on. There's always new ways of looking at things, and we need to constantly evaluate our practice. And I want to help with that. And there are 2 ways in which I can help you with it. So I mentioned before that I have a course. This is the main information of my course. It's called An Introduction to Inclusive Approaches. And it's going to cover the areas we've looked at today, but in a lot more detail. And it's going to focus a lot more on inclusive methodologies. So this is an overview, basically. So we are going to think more about well-being, social and emotional needs, and social and emotional learning. We're going to look at the principles in more detail and think about them in a more practical way. And we're going to look at some different learner-centered approaches. And also, and I think this is really important, is to think about how we can align learner-centered approach with our curriculums and our objectives and what we need to include, because it's part of what the school is, the school's program, or it's the ministry's program, or whatever. I think this is an important part of the course. And it's going to be live, so it's going to be actual classes, workshops. There'll be 3 sessions over 3 weeks, which will be 1.5 hours to 2, depending on the week. And it's going to be interactive as well. So it's not just about me talking to you. It's about helping you kind of develop your own strategies and work on your class, one of your classes in your context. There'll be a community as well, and I'll be hopefully giving you some support on how you can implement any changes that you decide to make. So that's basically what the course is. And it's going to start at the end of September, 26th of September. I know there are other free courses out there with a similar name. In fact, I did one a couple of weeks ago, in the last couple of weeks. But some of you may have also done it. It's a British Council course. I think the experience is very different, and the content is also quite different. Some of the basics might overlap, especially in the first week. But in this course, we're going to focus more on how you can adapt your classroom approach to a more learner-centered one, because that's the way I think we can be more inclusive. So if you're interested, it starts on the 26th of September. And I've decided to offer you a special discount if you want to join. I'm going to give you a 25% discount. But you'll need to insert this code. So if you're thinking about maybe signing up, copy down the code somewhere in case you want to sign up later. This code will be open until the 18th of September. If you have any questions about the course, you can just let me know, DM me on Facebook or email me, and you can actually use this QR code to go to the website now if you want to. But I said there were 2 ways in which I could help, and if you're not sure about making an investment, although the course really isn't very expensive, especially considering the live sessions, but I have something else that you may be interested in, which is completely free. I know we all love free stuff. So next week, I'll be running this Inclusive Classroom Back to School 5-day challenge here on Facebook in a group, in a special group that I've created. All you'll need for this is maybe 15-20 minutes a day to explore how to make your classroom more inclusive. And if it's okay with T, I'll post the sign up link in the hub later, maybe just in this thread of this video. The Facebook group actually opens tomorrow, and the challenge itself starts on Monday. So it's running next week from Monday to Friday. Now, you have no excuse because you don't have to pay a penny. So I expect to see you all there. I'm joking, obviously. You may be on holiday or something. But I think it's a good time to do this before we actually go back into the classroom, to make sure we have everything set up, at least in our minds, and we have some strategies that we can take forward to start the new school year. So that's it for me. If anyone has any questions, feel free to just add them in the chat now. And I was going to see if I can add my confetti. Confetti. Yay.
We did have a question from Elena. Elena, who did a session a while back on
I can't hear. I'm sorry. You're like
frame.
I couldn't hear that. So
Breaking up.
Yeah, you're breaking up. I don't know. In the chat of Zoom or in the chat of Facebook? Can't see either of them. Oh, I can see a question from Elena about team building activities. Is that the one?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Off the top of my head, we're trying to think. I mean, really, it's going to depend on the age of your students. Because I remember I wrote a blog post last year, I think it was, about team building activities for teenagers. I'll see if I can find that and share it in the thread. With primary, obviously, it will be a little bit different just because of what you can do with them. I can't think off the top of my head right now, but I'm sure I've got some activities somewhere up my sleeve. I like to do a lot of activities where they have to make something, for example, build something or make something, because I think those kind of activities take the pressure off in terms of language, because I think for me personally, I'm okay with them using L1 in these types of activities. Oh, have I stopped sharing my screen? I can't. Hang on a second. I've lost control of what I'm looking at, so I don't know what you can see. Well, I'm just going to stop sharing my screen. Easier. Okay, I can see. I can see T now, and I can see myself. Yeah. So, yeah. So I like to do anything where they have to work in groups to make something together. It could be a challenge. You know that famous spaghetti tower activity? I probably wouldn't do that with primary, maybe with upper primary, where they have to build a freestanding structure out of just spaghetti and like maybe plasticine or Play-Doh or something like that. Those kind of activities I think would be fun. Or out of paper cups, a tower out of paper cups, those kind of things can be just fun. I think it's good to just make the team building activities as fun as possible as well. So it's not obviously team building, do you know what I mean? But I'm going to have a think and see if I can share any specific activities for primary. Do you teach primary, Elena? Yes. Well, I see a yes. I don't know if it's answer to that question because I'm just not in control of the chat and yeah. But yeah, I'll in fact I'm trying to think if the 5-week challenge included this or not. I can't remember. I planned it all last week. But in any case, sign up to the challenge. And even if it's not one of the main topics, I'm sure there'll be we can, set up some kind of discussion, because the challenge is going to be in the Facebook group with a thread where we can all kind of respond to each other's ideas and share ideas together. That's what I'm really excited about, actually. I think it'll be a lot of fun. So join if you can.
Awesome. I don't know if you can now hear me, Michelle. I've closed my Facebook page, but yay! It must just be like too many things open when I had it on Facebook so I could watch the comments as well. So if anybody's commented in the last minute, I have not seen it. There were a couple of thank you messages from Stephanie and from Simon. And yes, Elena, she teaches young learners. She has a fabulous blog as well. And she did a session a while back on literacy with young learners as well. So yeah, so yes, definitely join up for the 5-day challenge, and then join up for the course as well, starting this time next month, pretty much.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm going to join the Facebook group, the 5-day challenge.
Yeah, do. I mean, it is kind of focusing on young learners from my perspective, but actually I've had people ask me, oh, can I join if I teach adults? And I was like, yes, of course you can, because really the ideas, the principles are all the same. Inclusive principles are the same for everyone. So it's just a matter of thinking specifically about your context and adapting ideas to them, to your students, which is what inclusivity is all about, really. So
fabulous. Well, thank you so much for the session this morning, Michelle. I know we've all got lots to think about going on, and I thought it was really interesting what you were saying about how we tend to use the communicative approach, and that just really doesn't work for some of our learners. And so looking at different, more inclusive approaches that we can incorporate into our teaching is it will help us develop as teachers as well, which is always a good thing.
Yeah, I mean, I just I know that when I talk about this, I sometimes might come across as, oh, the communicative approach is really bad. No, I'm not saying that, and I'm also not saying that you have to use one single approach, because I think most good teachers draw on different approaches and different methodologies, and you're going to find what works for your students. That's the main thing.
Excellent. Fabulous. Well, thanks everyone who was watching live. Remember, if you're watching on catch up, just leave a quick hello, or if you've got a question, it's probably better to tag either Michelle or I so that we spot it when it gets added. But hope everyone has a fabulous day, and we'll be back in a couple of weeks with another webinar. I'm back next week with our regular Thursday coffee breaks too. Cheerio.